The official record, should any scholar be mad enough to consult it, would state that the reign of Alpha King Barrett Locke was defined by the unification of the Northern and Southern Pacts, the revision of the ancient trade accords, and a period of unprecedented lupine prosperity. The official record would be a lie. The reign of Alpha King Barrett Locke was defined by a fat orange cat named Humphrey. It had begun, as most of Dinah's best and worst ideas did, with a simple act of defiance. The mating contract was 17 pages long. Dinah had read every one of them twice, standing in her kitchen at 3 a.m. with a mug of tea gone cold and Humphrey draped across the relevant footnotes. The terms were reasonable: her own wing in the castle, a seat on the council, albeit a non-voting one, the right to continue her work as a pack negotiator. She had initialed each clause, and then, on the back of the final page, in handwriting that her sister had once described as aggressively legible, she had added a single, non-negotiable clause of her own. Item 18. The cat comes with me. Barrett Locke read the addendum in the Great Hall, standing at the full height of a man who had once ended a border war by walking into the opposing camp and sitting down, and held the page at a distance that suggested it might be contagious. "A cat," he said. His voice was the kind of low that usually made mountains reconsider their structural choices. "We are wolves, Dinah. We are the apex predators of the deep wood, the singers of the moon's ancient song, the very embodiment of wild sovereignty. And Humphrey is the very embodiment of napping." She didn't look up from the other documents she was signing. "He'll fit right in with the court elders." Something in his chest, the part of him that tracked threats and assessed territory and had already decided 3 days ago that she smelled like wood smoke and something reckless, went still for a fraction of a second. Then it said, "Mate. Mate is funny. Keep the mate. Sign the paper. This is not a suggestion." Barrett translated this internal riot into a single, weary sigh. The cat is not to be a nuisance. Humphrey, who was at that moment asleep on the armrest of the ancestral throne 17 feet away, did not hear this. He would not have cared. But history would note that the terms were accepted, and the war that followed was entirely of his making. The throne was the first territory lost. It happened on the 3rd day. Barrett was in the Great Hall receiving the morning's petitions, a land dispute from the western farmsteads, a request to expand the millworks, something interminable about sheep, when Humphrey walked in through a door that no one had seen open. He crossed the hall at the unhurried pace of a creature who has never once been late for anything and does not intend to start. He passed the petitioners without acknowledgement. He reached the dais, considered the carved heartwood throne, petrified, ancient, built for an alpha 3 times his size, and jumped up onto the seat. He turned around once, twice, settled into the exact center of the cushion with a slow, deliberate compression that seemed to push the air from the room, closed his eyes. Barrett, who was mid-sentence regarding the sheep situation, stopped talking. The petitioner, a weathered farmer named Garin, who had been explaining his boundary claim with the intensity of a man who has rehearsed this conversation in the shower for a week, also stopped talking. The hall was silent. Humphrey opened one eye, registered the audience, and began to purr. The sound carried in the stone hall with the resonance of a small, self-satisfied engine. Dinah, watching from the side gallery where she'd been reviewing correspondence, felt Sylvana, the part of her that filed everything under threat or non-threat and communicated in clipped tactical assessments, run a quick evaluation. Not a threat. Strategically sound positioning. Note: the king's face is doing something. Barrett's face was, in fact, doing something. The particular micro-expression of a man who is aware that he is being watched by 40 people and must now decide whether to physically remove a sleeping cat from the ancestral seat of power or simply not. He chose not. He stepped to the left of the throne, adjusted his stance, addressed Garen's sheep concern from a position approximately 2 feet from where he was supposed to be standing, as if this were perfectly natural, as if every alpha king in the Locke line had governed from slightly left of center, while a 15-pound orange cat occupied the seat of ancestral authority. The boundary, Barrett said, will be surveyed by the end of the week. Continue. Garin, to his credit, continued. He did not look at the cat. Nobody looked at the cat. The cat was not there. The cat had never been there. The Alpha King simply preferred to stand. The guards, whose job required them to maintain neutral expressions under circumstances ranging from border incursions to state funerals, would later describe this as the hardest day of their professional careers. By the end of the first week, the castle staff had a name for it: the King's Position. They used it with entirely straight faces. Barrett stood, Humphrey sat. The kingdom adjusted. The other conquests followed in rapid succession. The royal seal, a heavy iron disc embossed with the lock crest that Barrett used to authenticate formal correspondence, disappeared on the fourth day. Marcus found it under Humphrey, who was asleep on it in a patch of sun near the east window. They moved Humphrey. They retrieved the seal. Humphrey returned to the seal within the hour. They moved him again. He returned again. On the third attempt, Marcus, who had survived 4 years as beta to the most stubborn alpha in the Northern Territories and knew when a war was unwinnable, simply began bringing documents to the cat. "Lord Humphrey," he said with a straight face, lifting the seal from beneath the cat's warm belly, "I require this for the Eastern trade correspondence. I will return it when I am finished." Humphrey yawned. He approved, Marcus told Barrett. He did not approve, Barrett said. He yawned. Those are different things. In my experience, Marcus said, they are not. The council table fell next. Humphrey developed an opinion about the arrangement of documents that he communicated by sitting on anything he considered misplaced. The first time it happened, Anya's patrol reports shuffled to the bottom of the pile by a cat who had walked across them with the focused determination of a creature rearranging the world to its specifications. The council had attempted to work around him. By the third meeting, they were positioning their papers in advance, clearing the center of the table for a cat-sized space that no one acknowledged and everyone respected. Anya, who had commanded 3 border campaigns and once tracked a rogue wolf through a blizzard for 48 hours without sleep, placed her patrol reports to the left of the cat zone without comment. She had, she explained to Marcus later, simply made a tactical assessment about which battles were worth fighting. This was not one of them. The crowning achievement came during the state visit of Alpha Titus of the Silver Creek Pack. Titus was a large man who wore his ceremonial sword the way some men wore personality: strapped on, conspicuous, compensating. The sword was encrusted with more jewels than sense, and he placed it on the council table during the opening formalities with the careful reverence of a man laying down a very expensive argument. Humphrey was at the far end of the table, asleep on a stack of trade documents. He was not asleep. Dinah saw it. The slight shift in his ears, the way his weight redistributed almost imperceptibly onto his front paws. She had lived with this cat for 6 years. She knew what it looked like when he was calculating. Sylvana. He's going to do something. The something took 11 seconds. Humphrey rose, stretched, with the elaborate nonchalance of a creature with absolutely nowhere to be, and walked the length of the council table. He passed the trade documents. He passed the water pitcher. He reached the sword, considered it with one slow blink, and extended a single paw. The sword went off the table with a sound like a chandelier having a disagreement with gravity. It hit the stone floor, bounced once, and came to rest at Titus's feet with a jeweled clatter that echoed through the hall. Humphrey sat where the sword had been, made eye contact with Titus, held it, began to purr. The silence that followed had a texture. It was the silence of 30 people simultaneously deciding what they had and had not just witnessed. Titus's face went through several colors that Dinah hadn't known faces could produce. Barrett's expression didn't change, which took a kind of effort that Dinah filed away. The man had self-control like a structural material. "Lord Humphrey," Barrett said, addressing the cat with the grave formality he usually reserved for treaty signatories, "has expressed a preference regarding the table arrangement. Alpha Titus, perhaps the sword would be more comfortable on the rack by the door." The trade negotiations that followed were, by all accounts, surprisingly favorable to Greywood. Titus made concessions he had not planned to make. Whether this was because he had been diplomatically outmaneuvered or because he had been psychologically devastated by a 15-pound cat, the official record did not say. The first morning, Dinah woke to an empty bed and a cold space beside her that smelled like pine and something darker. Iron, maybe? Or just the particular scent of a man who carried authority like a weather system. She lay still, listening. The pre-dawn quiet in the castle had a different quality than any silence she'd known. It was stone silence, deep and mineral, the kind that soaked up sound rather than merely containing it. Through it, she heard the soft displacement of weight on the balcony railing. The boards didn't creak so much as exhale. And then the muffled percussion of something very large hitting frost-stiffened ground 4 stories below. She got up. The flagstones were cold enough to hurt. She crossed to the window and looked down. A wolf was running the perimeter of the castle grounds. Not a patrol. She knew the difference. She had grown up reading wolves the way some people read weather. Not a drill. This was something else entirely. A colossal black wolf, larger than any she had seen in years of pack life. His fur so dark it seemed less like a color than like a place where light stopped. He was moving at full speed along the tree line, great paws eating the frozen earth, breath billowing out in white clouds that hung in the still air for a moment before dissolving. His stride was enormous and unhurried at the same time, the particular gait of something that has been kept in one place too long and is now, briefly, remembering what its legs were for. He hit the first line of trees without slowing. The forest took him in, and he was gone. She stood at the window with her bare feet on the cold stone and watched the space where he'd disappeared. The frost on the grounds was torn in a long, curving line, the only evidence he'd been there at all. Somewhere beyond the tree line she could feel it. Not the mate bond, not yet. Just the peripheral awareness of something very large moving through the world at speed, and the particular silence that gathers in the space behind it. He came back in 20 minutes. She watched him emerge from the trees at a trot, shaking snow from his fur, and shift at the base of the walls with the ease of someone stepping out of a coat. One form, then the other, fluid and complete. He didn't look up. She stepped back from the window. Some things, she understood, were not meant to be witnessed. They were meant to be known, quietly, and kept. Sylvana filed it. She had a specific category for this, things that were true and worth keeping, that didn't fit anywhere official. It was, by the end of the first month, a substantial file. She had not mentioned this to Dinah. She was not Rex. Barrett maintained, publicly and with theatrical conviction, that the cat was a trial sent by the moon goddess to test his legendary patience. "I tolerate the creature for diplomatic reasons," he announced at dinner one evening. Humphrey was on the table. This was no longer unusual. What was unusual was that he had positioned himself next to Barrett's plate and was eating the salmon directly from it with the serene efficiency of a customs official processing a routine shipment. Each bite was deliberate, unhurried. He chewed with his eyes half closed and his ears tilted at a precise angle of satisfaction. Barrett did not move his plate. He did not move the cat. He ate around the cat's selections with the careful choreography of a man sharing a meal with a dining partner whose preferences he had learned to anticipate. "There are historical precedents," he continued, cutting his bread with his left hand, while Humphrey investigated the fish with renewed interest. "I have asked the council historians. It is a gray area, legally." "You love him," Dinah said. It was the first time she said it. It would not be the last. "The precedent is ancient," Barrett said, "and very dry, but it is there." "Tell her," Rex said. "Tell her we love the small king. He is orange, and he is ours, and his fur is the best thing." Barrett took a deliberate bite of bread and said nothing. The castle knew. The guards knew. The gossip network, more efficient than any Raven system and considerably less expensive to maintain, had disseminated the truth within 48 hours of Dinah's arrival. The Alpha King was in love with the cat. The condition appeared to be structural. The irrefutable evidence came 3 nights in, and Dinah found it by accident. She'd left a book in the study, a negotiation manual, tabbed and annotated, that she needed for the morning's correspondence. She padded down the corridor in bare feet, the castle quiet around her except for the low hum of the guard's rotation 2 floors below, and pushed open the study door. Barrett was on the floor. The Alpha King of Greywood, who had ended a border war by walking into the opposing camp and sitting down, who commanded the largest pack territory in the northern reaches, whose voice made mountains reconsider their choices, was sitting cross-legged on the stone floor of his study in the lamplight, dangling a small felt mouse on a length of twine. Humphrey was airborne. The cat launched himself from a standing start, all 15 pounds committed to the arc, front paws extended, back legs providing propulsion with the focused elegance of something that has decided that this, specifically, is the entire purpose of existence. He missed the mouse by an inch, hit the ground, gathered himself, launched again. Barrett twitched the twine. Humphrey adjusted. The felt mouse swung left. Humphrey recalculated his trajectory mid-leap with the intensity of a general adjusting battlefield strategy, and caught the mouse in both paws. He landed, rolled, and emerged with the mouse clenched in his teeth, tail lashing. Barrett made a sound. Dinah, standing in the doorway with one hand on the frame, catalogued it precisely. A low, involuntary laugh that came from somewhere below his diaphragm, rough-edged and surprised, as if it had escaped without clearance. His face was doing the thing she'd seen once, briefly, during the throne incident, but fuller now, unguarded in the specific way people are when they are absolutely certain that no one is watching. The lines around his eyes had rearranged. His mouth had given up on the shape it usually held. He looked, she thought, like a person she hadn't met yet. He dangled the mouse again. Humphrey released, crouched, and launched. Barrett's other hand came up, gently, absently, and scratched behind the cat's ears when he landed on his lap. Humphrey began to purr. Barrett's fingers worked the fur with the particular attention of someone doing something that matters. Dinah didn't retrieve the book. She didn't announce herself. She stepped back from the doorway, returned to the bedroom, and lay in the dark, cataloging what she'd seen with the precision of a woman who understood that some evidence is best kept in a single jurisdiction. Sylvana filed it under things she would carry like a stone in a pocket, smooth, substantial, real. She mentioned to Marcus the next morning, in passing, that the king seemed to be developing a soft spot for small, defenseless things. She mentioned to the head cook that Humphrey preferred his salmon lightly poached, just as the king did. She planted seeds, watered nothing, and let the garden grow entirely on its own. The piece that closed the case permanently came later. She woke one night to moonlight and sound. The moon was a silver coin in black velvet, laying a stripe of white across the floorboards that ended precisely at the foot of the bed. The space beside her was empty. The sound was coming from there, from the foot of the bed. Soft, rhythmic, impossibly gentle for something of its size. Barrett had shifted. His wolf form filled the space at the foot of the bed the way a boulder fills a stream, not by force, but by the simple fact of its mass. He was enormous. His fur was the black she'd seen from the window during the dawn runs, the kind of dark that seemed to have weight and depth that you could fall into. He was curled in a tight circle with his great head resting on his front paws and tucked against his chest, held between those paws with the specific, deliberate care a wolf gives to a pup, was Humphrey. The cat was entirely supine, belly to the ceiling, paws curled. Eyes half-lidded with the absolute, boneless trust of a creature who has either made a sophisticated risk assessment or has no concept of risk at all. The rhythmic sound was Barrett's tongue. He was grooming behind Humphrey's ears, slowly, thoroughly, with the focused attention of a wolf performing a task that mattered, in the way wolves do things when no one is watching, completely, without performance, because the concept of shame about the things they love is not a thing their architecture supports. Humphrey was purring so hard it came up through the mattress. Dinah didn't move. She didn't breathe louder than she needed to. She lay on her side and watched, and catalogued it. The angle of the enormous head tilted to accommodate the small skull. The particular care around the cat's chin, where the tongue moved in short, careful strokes. The way the wolf's body, massive, built for running and fighting and holding territory, had organized itself entirely around this one small task, as if there were nothing else in the castle worth doing. She stayed with it for a long time, long enough for Humphrey's purr to peak and then settle into a deeper, slower frequency, the kind that meant true sleep was coming. Long enough for the moonlight to shift a few degrees across the floor. Long enough to understand what she was looking at. This was a man who had been told for so long that love was a liability that he had learned to love in secret, in the dark, with no audience, when he was absolutely certain no one was watching. That the love existed at all, under all that careful armor, behind all those years of governing alone, seemed to her more remarkable than anything he might do with a sword or a treaty. Silvana went quiet. Not the filing quiet, not the assessment quiet, something else. She sent something with no category, something warm and without language. Write it down, Silvana said, not as a suggestion, as information. She had already done so. Filed under worth keeping. Subfile, do not use against him. Dinah went back to sleep smiling. He didn't know she'd seen. He would never know she'd seen. It was hers. The truth of him, carried quietly, like proof. The rogue wolf situation came to a head in the second month. Marcus arrived in the great hall with the expression of a man who has rehearsed his delivery twice and still doesn't love it. He spread a map across the council table, on the non-Humphrey side, and waited for Barrett to finish the morning's last petition before speaking. 6 wolves, possibly 8. He tapped the eastern border. Here, living in the wood, just inside our line. We think they're remnants of the Ashvale pack. Their alpha died last autumn, no succession. No territory, no structure. He moved his finger along a track of marked sightings. They've been raiding the outer farmsteads, grain stores mostly, a hen house. Last week, one of Anya's border patrols encountered 3 of them. He paused. Dinah, in the window seat with Humphrey across her thighs, heard the pause and knew it for what it was, the space where bad news lives. It didn't escalate, Marcus said, but it was close. Barrett studied the map. His hands were flat on the table, and Dinah could see the tendons standing out along the backs of them, the particular tension of a man holding something down. How many of our people are at risk? The Milford farmstead is closest, family of 4, 2 pups. Marcus hesitated. They're frightened. Send a warrior patrol, 3 to 5. Make it clear they're not welcome on our land. Barrett! Dinah said it from the window seat. Quietly. Not a challenge, just her name for the space between what he'd said and what he hadn't considered. She shifted Humphrey's weight off the relevant thigh so she could turn properly. May I? He looked at her. The part of him that tracked exits and assessed sightlines, the wolf layer that was always running, always mapping the room, registered the way she held herself. Leaned forward, both feet on the floor, the posture of someone who has something specific to say and has already thought it through. They're not raiding for sport, she said. They're raiding because they're hungry, and they don't know what else to do. Ashvale dissolution was badly handled. The council just dissolved. No transition, no arrangement. Those wolves have nowhere to go. She glanced at the map. If you drive them off the eastern border, they'll surface somewhere else. And the next alpha they encounter may not think twice before. I know the situation. Not unkindly, but with the particular finality of a man closing a door and checking the lock. I also know what happens when you leave wolves without structure on a territory boundary. It becomes an invitation. He met her eyes. 3 warriors, 2 weeks. If they're still inside our border after that, we escalate. Dinah looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. She could feel the shape of the argument that would come next. The one where she pushed harder, where he pushed back, where they both said things that were true and neither of them listened. And she chose not to have it. All right, she said. and looked back down at her letters. Silvana updated the file. He heard you. He didn't listen. Probable timeline for arrival at correct conclusion, 10 to 14 days. She had learned to be specific. Anya led the patrol herself. She left at dawn with 2 wolves in graywood colors, moving through the early mist toward the tree line with the posture of someone who has done this before and intends to do it properly. Dinah watched them go from the upper corridor. Beside her, through the open window, the cold air carried pine and frost, and underneath, the faint musk of other wolves, the rogue scent, thin and sharp with cortisol, that had been drifting across the eastern grounds for weeks. She wondered if Barrett could smell it from the Great Hall. She knew he could. She knew he had been smelling it since before Marcus brought the map. Anya came back on the 3rd day. Her report was brief, which was always a sign. We found their camp, Eastern Wood, half a mile inside the border. Makeshift shelters, lean-tos and 1 tent. Looks like they've been there 2 months at least. She stood before Barrett with the map unrolled, pointing to a spot she'd marked in charcoal. Her patrol leathers still smelled of deep forest. We showed ourselves at the tree line, made it clear who we were. She paused. The particular pause Anya had when she was choosing words with more care than her usual economy required. They didn't run. They just stood there. 7 of them, at the edge of the camp, watching us. Not threatening, not moving, just... She shifted her weight. Watching, like people waiting for something they've been waiting for a long time. The hall was quiet. Humphrey, asleep on the throne, twitched an ear. The youngest one can't be more than 18. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in a month. Barrett was still. The kind of still that Dinah had come to recognize as processing. Not the decisive stillness of a man about to act, but the heavier kind. The stillness of a man encountering information that doesn't fit where he'd like to put it. Did they receive the message? He asked. They received it. Whether they'll act on it. Anya shook her head slightly. Alpha, these are not raiders. Raiders have structure. Raiders have a plan. What I saw was 7 wolves who don't know what to do next and are running out of time to figure it out. It was almost exactly what Dinah had said in the council meeting. She didn't point this out. She could feel the weight of Barrett's attention from across the room, the quality of his stillness shifting. Something in it recognizing what it had already been told. Keep the patrol on the eastern rotation, he said. Double the frequency. I want to know if they move. Anya nodded, rolled the map, and left. Marcus gave Dinah a look she chose not to receive. That night, past midnight, the balcony doors opened again. The cold came in like a third presence. She heard the railings take his weight, and then the sound of something very large dropping into the dark. This run was different. She didn't need to see it to know. The dawn run was joyful and fast, forward-facing, an animal remembering what it was built for. This one, she could feel the shape of it through the mate bond's earliest, faintest threads, was slower, lower to the ground, working something out that didn't have a solution yet. He came back before the sky lightened, shifted quietly at the balcony, got into bed and lay on his back and said nothing. She said nothing either. After a moment, she moved closer to him. Not a conversation, just a fact. His skin was cold from the run, and he smelled like pine sap and frozen earth, and the deep, wild animal musk that clung to him for hours after a shift. His breathing, which had been controlled and deliberate, eased. His hand found hers under the blankets. He held on. For 11 days, the farmsteads were quiet. On the 12th, the Milford grain store was hit again, harder. The lock was broken with more desperation than force. The wood around it splintered in a way that spoke of cold hands and urgency rather than planning. The family reported sounds in the night. 2 pups kept awake and frightened. Barrett didn't send the warriors again. He came to find Dinah that evening in the library, where she was reading with Humphrey installed across her feet like a small, furry boulder. He stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, in the particular posture of a man who has walked to a door and is now deciding whether to walk through it. "You want to say something," he said. "I want to go and talk to them." She set her book down. Not officially. Just go and listen. Find out what they need. Alone. With Anya, if it makes you feel better. And Humphrey, probably, because he'll follow me regardless and he's proven himself diplomatically. He came into the room and sat in the chair across from her. In the firelight, the shadows under his eyes were heavier than she'd seen them. His hands were clasped between his knees, and she watched them. Watched the way his thumb pressed against the opposite palm, in a slow, repetitive motion. A self-soothing gesture she doubted he knew he was making. "You're a pack negotiator," he said. "You are very good at what you do. I am not contesting that." He was looking at his hands. "But this is my territory and my pack. And if the negotiation goes wrong, it goes wrong on my land, with my people at risk. There's a limit to how much of my authority I can hand over and still—" "I'm not asking for your authority," she said. "I'm asking for your trust." The distinction landed. She saw it hit. The slight arrest of his thumb against his palm, the way his jaw shifted. He sat with it. "Give me a few more days," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The fire shifted in the grate. Something in his face was asking for something he didn't know how to name. And she recognized it. Not because he'd told her, but because she had been watching him for 2 months, and the file was extensive. "All right," she said, and she meant it, not as a concession, as a choice. Silvana, pending, active file, do not close. The days she gave him were not comfortable, exactly, but they were not the brittle kind of uncomfortable. The tension between them had a texture she was learning to read. Not cold, not distant, just held. Like something under pressure that hadn't found its shape yet. On the first evening, they argued about the council table. It was, objectively, a ridiculous argument. The table was scarred and worn and had been fine for 40 years, which was, Dinah pointed out, precisely the problem, since fine for 40 years was not actually a standard anyone should aspire to for furniture or governance. Barrett argued that the table had historical value and that resurfacing it would be an unnecessary expenditure during a period that also involved absorbing 7 rogue wolves and replacing the Milford grain store lock, neither of which were free. Dinah argued that a kingdom that couldn't afford to sand a table was a kingdom with larger problems than its furniture budget. Humphrey resolved the dispute by sitting on the most worn section and refusing to move. He fell asleep with his paw on the deepest gouge, a posture that could be interpreted as either "this table needs work" or "this table is mine and I will decide its fate." Barrett looked at the cat, looked at Dinah. Something in his expression was struggling against itself, and the thing it was struggling against was the urge to laugh. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth did something it wasn't supposed to do. "We'll discuss it in the spring," he said. "We'll discuss it until I'm right," Dinah said. "Mate is right," Rex offered, from somewhere deep in Barrett's chest. "The table is bad. The small king agrees. I have spoken." Barrett closed his eyes briefly, in the manner of a man receiving counsel he did not request. On the second evening they had dinner alone together, the usual retinue reduced to a single cook who brought the food and left with the efficiency of someone who could read a room at 40 paces. The silence between them was not hostile. Dinah thought that might have been easier to navigate. Hostility had edges you could find in the dark. This silence was just the space where 2 people were each waiting for the other person to find the right words, and neither of them had found them yet. Barrett ate with the methodical attention he brought to everything, fully present, nothing wasted. He refilled her wine without being asked. He passed the bread without ceremony, small acts of consideration performed so automatically that she doubted he knew he was doing them, which was, she had come to understand, exactly the kind of man he was. Someone whose care came out in logistics and small attentions, rather than declarations, because he had been told for so long that care was a liability that he'd learned to express it in ways he could plausibly deny. "The Milford family," he said eventually, not as an opener, more like something that had been sitting in his chest all day and had found a crack to escape through. "Yes." I went out to the farmstead this morning, unofficially. He was looking at his plate. The father, his name is Harwin, he showed me where the lock was broken, walked me through it. He stopped, set down his fork, picked it up again. He wasn't angry, he was just frightened. He kept saying, we understand it's complicated, we don't want to cause trouble. Barrett's voice dropped, and the thing in it wasn't anger. It was something rawer than that, something that lived underneath anger, in the place where a leader keeps the things he can't fix fast enough. As if a man whose grain store has been raided twice should be apologizing to me for the inconvenience of his children being scared. He set the fork down again. This time he didn't pick it up. I don't know how to make that right with a warrior patrol, he said. Dinah let the sentence sit. She let it have the room. She didn't fill the silence with a solution, because the solution wasn't the thing he needed right now. What he needed was for someone to hear him arrive at the answer he'd been circling. I know, he said, which was not the same as, I'll try it your way, but it was closer than anything he'd said in the council meeting. It was close enough. They finished dinner without solving anything. Dinah counted this as progress. On the third evening, Marcus found her in the library and sat down without being invited. His jacket was dusty, and he smelled like old stone. He'd been in the lower corridors again, doing whatever it was Marcus did when the castle's infrastructure needed attention that no one else would think to give it. He went out again last night, Marcus said. The run. I know. Came back and sat in the study until dawn. I was up with the Eastern supply reports. I could see the light under the door. He paused. At one point I heard him talking. To the cat, I think. I didn't listen. Dinah looked at him over the top of her book. He's not going to ask for help, Marcus said. He knows he needs it. He just hasn't found the language for asking yet. He met her eyes, and his expression was the one she'd come to associate with Marcus at his most honest. Straightforward, slightly tired, and carrying the weight of a loyalty that had outlasted several other people's patience. I've been watching him govern alone for 4 years, Dinah. It has been, if I'm honest, exhausting for everyone involved. I would very much like someone else to share the weight. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the one he needs to ask. He stood, smoothed his dusty jacket. Also, Anya says the Western Parapet draft has gotten worse. I'm going to go look at it. He left with the particular purposefulness of a man who has said what he came to say and now intends to do something useful with his hands. Dinah sat with it, looked down at Humphrey, who was draped across her feet with the complete boneless confidence of a creature that has never once sat with unresolved tension. You have it very easy, she told him. Humphrey purred. The next morning she woke early to an empty bed and open balcony doors. The dawn run. She lay listening to the silence and thought about Marcus's words. He just hasn't found the language for asking yet. She thought about the dinner table. The bread passed without ceremony, the wine refilled, the story of Harwin and his frightened children, and the way Barrett had set down his fork and not picked it up again. The midnight runs that had shifted from joyful to something heavier. He was finding the language. He was finding it the way he found everything, slowly, completely, without shortcuts. At his own pace, in his own order, the way a wolf works through unfamiliar territory, not by asking for a map, but by running every inch of it until the ground is known. She got up, dressed, and went to find her cat. Humphrey was not where she expected him to be. She checked the throne room, empty, except for a guard who confirmed Lord Humphrey had passed through some time ago, heading east. She checked the kitchens, where the cook had not seen him. She checked the study, where the felt mouse sat on the windowsill, slightly battered and unmoved. She found him at the eastern edge of the castle grounds, where the maintained paths dissolved into real forest. He was sitting in a patch of thin morning light, washing a paw with the focused dedication of a cat performing essential maintenance, and utterly unmoved by the fact that a young wolf was crouched 6 feet away from him, frozen in place, staring at Humphrey with an expression of pure, bewildered wonder. The wolf, barely more than a pup, was 17 or 18 at most, with the particular gauntness that comes not from missing one meal, but from missing enough of them that the body has begun to make decisions about what it can afford to keep. His clothes were worn, his hands were shaking and not from cold. He had gone so still that Dinah's own wolf layer registered him first as landscape and then, a half-second later, corrected. Person. Afraid, not a threat. He was watching Humphrey with enormous eyes. The cat finished the paw, considered the other one, and then, with the absolute confidence of a creature who has never in his life been given a reason to doubt his welcome, walked directly toward the young wolf, sat on his boot, and began to purr. The young wolf looked at the cat on his boot. He looked at Dinah. He looked back at the cat. Dinah sat down on a nearby log. "He does that," she said. "You're not special. He does it to everyone." She let a beat pass. "My name's Dinah." Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "Cale." "How long have your group been in the Eastern Wood, Cale?" He tensed. She saw it go through him, the full body contraction of a prey animal that has heard something in the brush. She raised one hand, slow and open. "I'm not a warrior," she said. "I'm a pack negotiator. Different job. I ask questions, and I listen to the answers, and then I try to find an arrangement that keeps people from getting hurt." She looked down at Humphrey, who had settled in completely and was purring at a volume that seemed medically improbable. "My cat apparently shares the general philosophy, though his methods are more direct." Something shifted around Cale's eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the space where trust might go if given room. "He just sat on me," he said. The bewildered tone of a man filing an official complaint with no complaints department. "He does that to the Alpha King," Dinah said. "Regularly, during formal petitions." And there, just for a fraction of a second, something that was almost a smile. It crossed Cale's face like a bird crossing a window, gone before you could be sure it was there. He looked down at Humphrey, who had begun to knead his knee with small, methodical paws, entirely absorbed in the work of making whatever surface he occupied more personally satisfactory. "Ashevale Alpha died in October," Cale said. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed in their heads 100 times and are speaking aloud for the first. Fever. Fast. No warning. No succession plan. He was 53, and nobody had thought to ask the question yet. He was quiet. The forest around them made the sounds forests make when they're not being listened to. A branch settling, something small in the underbrush, the particular creak of cold trees. The council met for 4 days. Couldn't agree. 2 senior members left with their families the first week. After that, it just... He made a small gesture with one hand, palm up, fingers opening. "Dissolved is the word, like something in water." "How many of you came east?" 14. The number landed with weight. We'd heard Greywood was taking displaced wolves, integration agreements, provisional status. We came because we thought there might be a path. What happened? We were careful. We didn't want to cause problems. He said it with the emphasis of someone who knows how it sounds in retrospect. We stayed deep in the wood. We figured we'd find the right way to approach, find the right person to talk to. And then the food ran out faster than we expected, and the cold came early, and... He stopped. "There are 7 of us now. We lost 4 in a border incident 2 territories back before we made it here. 3 more left, to try elsewhere. Better odds alone, they thought." He said this last part without bitterness, just the flat, exhausted calculation of someone who has been doing math that doesn't add up for a long time and has stopped expecting it to. "Are your people willing to talk?" Dinah asked. "Properly, with the Alpha King, at a table, not in the dark." Cale was quiet for a long time. Humphrey kneaded. The forest breathed. Would he listen, Cale asked? Actually listen? Not just hear us out and then decide what he was already going to decide. "Say the rest," Dinah said. He looked at her. "Actually listen." "Yes," she said. She said it with the certainty of a woman who had spent 3 weeks watching a man fight his own better instincts and knew, with the bone-deep sureness of someone whose job was reading people, that the better instincts were going to win. He'll listen. She heard Barrett before she saw him. The controlled heaviness of his step in the undergrowth, a man who moved silently by nature and was, in this moment, choosing not to. Announcing himself, giving them time. He came through the trees and stopped. He saw his mate sitting on a log at the edge of his territory. He saw a rogue wolf he'd sent a patrol to displace. He saw his cat, installed on the rogue's knee, with the territorial conviction of a small furry annexation. He looked at Dinah. She looked back and didn't speak. The choice was entirely his. He looked at Cale. The young wolf had gone rigid, hands flat on his thighs, eyes tracking the alpha with the sharp, involuntary attention that prey gives to a predator.
Then Cale caught himself.
Corrected. Held still, deliberately, with the effort of someone who has been afraid long enough to know that fear is not the same as an answer. Barrett clocked this. She saw him see it. The way Cale's fear registered in Barrett's posture, not as satisfaction, but as information that cost him something to receive. Rex in his chest went quiet. Not the usual volume, something lower and more considered. Something she might have described, if pressed, as recognition. Sylvana in Dinah's. He came because he was looking for you. Filed. Barrett crouched. It was deliberate. A large man making himself smaller, bringing his eyeline below the young wolf's, and it cost him something to do it because he understood exactly what it communicated. Not weakness, but the choice to set down a weapon he didn't need. He looked at Humphrey, still installed on Cale's knee, purring with the unshakable confidence of a creature who has never once doubted the fundamental reasonableness of the universe. He seems comfortable, Barrett said. Cale blinked. Yes. He's not usually wrong about people. Barrett settled back on his heels, his posture open in the way Dinah had only seen during the dawn runs. Nothing held, nothing braced. He looked at Cale directly. Tell me about your pack. What happened and what you need. I'll listen first. Then I'll tell you what I can offer. Cale told him. Barrett listened in a way Dinah had not seen him listen in council, or in audiences, or in any of the formal contexts she'd observed. He listened the way he ran, completely, without performance, as if the act of receiving this information were the only task in the territory worth doing. When Cale described the council dissolution, Barrett leaned forward. When Cale mentioned the border incident, he asked, quietly, what territory, and nodded once. When Cale reached the 7 of them in the eastern wood, the food failing, the temperature dropping, the specific calculation of whether to approach openly or survive quietly and hope someone noticed, Barrett was silent for a long time. Looking at the ground between them, his hands were still. The farmstead raids, he said. I know. Cale's voice was steady, but Dinah could see the effort it took. I'm sorry, He stopped. There are pups. 3 of our 7 are under 10. Ren and Sorcha's youngest hadn't eaten in 2 days when we went to the grain store the first time. He said this without excuse, just as a fact, the fact that explains the other facts. Barrett was quiet. Then, the first time, the grain store in early autumn. Was that a plan or a decision made in the moment? Of all the questions Cale had braced for, this was not one of them. His surprise showed, a flicker of something recalibrating behind his eyes. In the moment, he said, we didn't go there with a plan. We just went. Barrett nodded, sat with it. The border incident, 2 territories back. What happened? Cale's face changed. Not a lot, just enough. The surface smoothing over as something underneath it pulled tight. We crossed into Irithmark territory trying to find a settlement. Didn't know where the boundary was. They didn't ask questions. A pause. We lost 4 people in about 10 minutes. We ran. He said it with the particular flatness of something relived so many times, the edges have worn down to just the shape. Barrett did not offer condolences. He received the information, nodded once, and moved on with the specific efficiency of someone who understands that unsolicited sympathy often costs the person receiving it more than it's worth. Your elder, Petra. How long was she on the Ashvale Council? Another unexpected question. Cale looked at him. Really looked, for the first time, with something other than fear. 22 years. She's the reason there are 7 of us instead of none. Names, Barrett said. Your people. What are their names? Cale blinked. There's me, Petra, Ren and Sorsha. They're bonded. They have the 3 pups. Ren, she's 15. And Bram. He paused. Bram's been sick. The cold. We've been managing it. Sick how? Fever. Comes and goes. He needs warmth and food and rest. Cale said each word carefully, as if laying down cards face down. He had asked for enough already. He would not ask for more. Barrett was quiet. The forest waited. Somewhere a bird was singing with the oblivious persistence of a creature that does not know it is performing for an audience. I can offer provisional status, Barrett said. It isn't full pack membership. That takes time and trust, and it has to go both directions. But it means you're on our land with our protection. Your people have access to the Eastern Farmstead communal stores through the winter. Come spring, we negotiate terms properly. He looked at Cale. Bram goes to our healer today. That's not a negotiating point. That's just what happens. Cale stared at him. There are conditions, Barrett continued. I'll want to meet your people. We move slowly. If anyone causes harm to a pack member or their property, the arrangement ends and I deal with it as a treaty violation. Those are the terms. A beat. They're fair. Cale was still staring. He looked, Dinah thought, like a man who has been carrying something so heavy for so long that the muscles have locked, and someone has just told him very matter-of-factly that he can put it down, and the putting down is the hardest part. If it doesn't work, Cale said carefully, the provisional terms. If someone in our group makes a mistake, then we address the mistake, specifically, the same way I address it with any pack member. No collective punishment. The arrangement doesn't collapse because one person makes a bad call. Barrett paused. I've made bad calls recently. I'm still in the chair. Something in Cale's posture shifted. Not all at once, but incrementally, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling at it. He was still wary. He would be wary for a while. But the braced quality, the held-in readiness of someone waiting for the blow they expected, had begun to ease. Petra will want to speak with you directly, he said. She'll have conditions of her own. Good. I'd be worried if she didn't. Why? Cale said, and then, catching himself, I mean, because hungry wolves on my border is a problem that gets worse, not better if I ignore it. Because my pack negotiator made a reasonable case 2 weeks ago that I should have listened to the first time. He did not look at Dinah. She did not need him to. And because your elder is named Petra, and your sick wolf is named Bram, and you've been managing a fever in a makeshift camp in my eastern wood for 2 months, and none of that is solved by sending more warriors. Cale let out a breath. It was the kind that takes a long time to fully leave. Yes, he said, we'll talk. Humphrey, who had determined that the situation had reached a satisfactory conclusion, stood up on Cale's knee, stretched with tremendous ceremony, and walked off into the undergrowth in search of something more personally interesting. That evening, after the arrangements were made and Cale had gone back to his people with a healer and 2 guards and a cart of supplies, Dinah and Barrett sat by the fire in their chambers. Humphrey was on the bed, asleep in the Royal Pillow's general jurisdiction. The felt mouse was on the windowsill, a permanent fixture now, slightly battered, as beloved and functional as anything in the castle. You were right, Barrett said. He was looking at the fire, his profile lit in warm, uneven light, the shadows moving across his face like something alive. At the council meeting, you saw what I didn't want to see. You saw it too. You just needed a few days. And a cat to make first contact. He almost smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting against its will, the small, involuntary movement she'd catalogued and kept. Rex would like me to note that he has suggested for some time that Humphrey is an intelligence asset of formidable capability, and that his judgment on territorial matters should be formally consulted. Rex's instincts are better than he lets on. Don't tell him that. He'll become insufferable. A pause. The fire shifted. I didn't listen because I was protecting something that wasn't under threat. You didn't try to take anything from me. You offered to help, and I... He stopped, looked at his hands. She waited. The fire was warm, and the room smelled like wood smoke, and the particular close scent of a place where two people have been living long enough to leave a mark on the air. My father governed alone, made every decision alone, trusted no one's judgment except his own. He called it strength. He turned his hands over, studying them, the way people do when they're reading something written there a long time ago. I know it wasn't. I know it better now than I knew it a week ago. What was it? He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind moved against the castle walls. Fear, he said. If you never rely on anyone, no one can leave while you're still relying on them. He looked at her, finally, directly, with the expression she'd catalogued that first night in the study, unwary, open, the face of a man who has decided to be seen and is going through with it. I don't know how to do this right, Dinah, having someone, trusting them properly. I keep waiting for the part where I've made myself too dependent and you... Don't finish that sentence, not unkindly. I'm not going anywhere. You might, someday, for 100 good reasons. I might, she agreed. People leave, packs dissolve, alphas die without successors. That's true, and it's frightening, and it's not a reason to spend the time you have alone inside your own walls. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm from the fire. I chose this, Barrett. I keep choosing it. You do too. That's what it is. He turned his hand over and held hers. His grip was strong and a little unsteady. I'm going to get it wrong again, he said. I'll close a door that should stay open. I'll be my father's son when I'm afraid. I know. I'll tell you when it's happening. You'll have to be direct. I have a thick skull. I have noticed. I've been told I have a sharp tongue. Between the two of us, we should manage. He was quiet for a moment, then, I'm in love with you. He said it the way he said everything, real, without performance, with a particular quiet certainty of someone speaking a fact they've been carrying and have finally decided to put down. Not as a revelation, as an admission, which is harder. I've been in love with you, she said, since the night I found you making undignified cat noises at the foot of the bed and decided to keep your secret. He went very still. The grooming. The grooming. A pause of considerable length. His hand tightened on hers. And you told no one, he said. Of course not. It was yours. The expression that crossed his face was one she hadn't seen before. Something between gratitude and the specific relief of a man who has been carrying a stone he expected to be used against him and has just discovered it was held safely all along. Not kept as leverage, not stored as ammunition. Just held, because it mattered, because it was true, because she had understood instinctively that some things are worth keeping without reason. Rex in his chest. Ours. Ours. Small king and mate and ours. We are a complete pack. I will compose the epic now. It will be 43 stanzas. I have already begun. Silvana, in Dinah's, sent nothing. She had filed this 6 weeks ago and had been waiting, with what she considered appropriate patience, for events to confirm her assessment. She did not say I told you so. She was not Rex. Thank you, Barrett said, quietly, like someone putting down the last heavy thing. She laughed, the real kind, warm and surprised, and he smiled, small, tired, genuine. They sat together by the fire while Humphrey snored on the royal pillow with the satisfied oblivion of a creature who has sorted out a territorial dispute, made a friend, and done a full day's work. Petra arrived 3 days after the provisional terms were signed. She walked into the council chamber the way some people walk into weather, already prepared for whatever it was going to be, and dressed accordingly. She was 51, compact, with gray at her temples, and the particular directness of a person who has served on councils long enough to be permanently out of patience for people who use 12 words when 3 will do. She surveyed the room. She noted the table, worn, scarred, clearly the subject of ongoing debate. She noted the council members, arranged in their seats with the studied casualness of people who have been told company is coming. She noted Humphrey, who was installed in the center of the table on a stack of trade documents, grooming his front paw. "Is that a cat?" she said. "Lord Humphrey," Marcus said without hesitation. "He is a council advisor. He specializes in territorial matters." Petra looked at Marcus. She looked at Humphrey. She sat down, opened her satchel, produced a sheaf of notes dense with handwriting, and placed them on the table with the crisp authority of someone laying down terms. "I have a number of thoughts about the grain distribution agreement," she said. "Specifically, the third allocation tier, which I believe was drafted without adequate understanding of winter variance in the eastern farmstead output. If the cat is taking notes, he should know I have documentation." Humphrey meowed. "He endorses the documentation," Barrett said with a perfectly straight face. "Please proceed." Petra proceeded. She proceeded for 45 minutes. She had charts. She had projections. She had a margin analysis of the third allocation tier that made Marcus sit forward in his chair and take notes of his own, which was either a sign of professional interest or professional alarm. It was the beginning of a working relationship that Marcus later described, in private, as unexpectedly functional and occasionally terrifying. Petra had no interest in court politics, and a great deal of interest in systems that worked properly, which turned out to be exactly the combination the Eastern allocation reports had been missing. Within a fortnight, she had revised the distribution model to benefit both the farmsteads and the integrated Ashvale group. She also, without being asked, identified the source of the Western parapet draft, which turned out to be connected to the same structural gap Marcus had been investigating. Marcus took this news with equanimity. He had, after all, already found the gap. He had just not yet had occasion to mention it to someone who would do something about it with this particular velocity. Bram's fever broke within the week. Wren and Sorcia's pups made friends with the Milford children in the way pups always do, immediately, completely, and without the slightest awareness that they were supposed to be a complicated political situation. Kale, it turned out, was a gifted sheepdog in his shifted form, a discovery he made on the Milford farm when a ewe got loose and he was there before anyone thought to ask him. The Milford family found this considerably more useful than anything the Warrior Patrol had accomplished. And Kale, crouching low, ears forward, moving the sheep with gentle precision, looked, for the first time since Dinah had met him, like someone doing something he was built for and had not previously been given permission to do. The pack run happened on the first full moon after the provisional terms were signed. Barrett had not invited the Ashvale wolves. It was too soon, too much. But Kale was on the grounds when the pack gathered at dusk, 30 wolves in a clearing behind the castle, shifting in ones and twos, the air filling with the sounds of changing bodies and the wild electric charge of a pack preparing to move together. Kale stood at the edge of the tree line, watching, his arms crossed over his chest in the posture of someone who is not part of something and knows it, and has made peace with knowing it. Barrett shifted. The black wolf emerged, enormous, unhurried, the alpha stepping into his other skin with the ease of putting on a coat, and the pack went quiet. 30 wolves, all eyes on him, waiting. He turned his head, looked at Kale. The invitation was not spoken because wolves do not speak. It was something simpler and older than that, a tilt of the great black head, a beat of stillness, and then movement. Barrett turned toward the forest, and the pack followed, and at the edge of the clearing, Kale shifted, his wolf form lean and gray and young, and fell in at the back of the pack with the careful, grateful stride of someone joining a run they hadn't been sure they'd be invited to. They ran. Through the eastern wood, over the frozen ground, through moonlight that turned the snow to silver. Dinah ran near the front, Sylvana's focus narrowing to the pure sensory engine of it, scent, ground, pack, the position of every body in the formation, the night air cold and clean in her lungs. Somewhere behind her, a young gray wolf was keeping up. By spring, 3 of the 7 had formally petitioned for full membership. The eastern farmsteads reported no further incidents. The Anya and Marcus situation resolved itself, as the B-plots of any well-run castle eventually do, with a piece of rotted wood and an unexpected dinner invitation. Marcus appeared in Anya's quarters on a Tuesday evening, trailing cobwebs from his hair, and holding a piece of rotted wall timber with the solemn expression of a man presenting evidence of great import. "The draft," he said. "Found the source. 4th section of the outer wall, just above the wainscoting. I've packed it. Should hold through winter, but I'd want to check it in spring." Anya looked at him, at the cobwebs, at the dust on his nose, at the piece of rotted wood he was holding out to her like a document requiring her signature. He had been trying to find the source of the draft in her quarters for 3 weeks, not because she'd asked, not because it was his job, because she had mentioned once, in passing, during a patrol debrief, that she found it difficult to sleep with the cold coming through the east wall, and he had apparently filed this information and acted on it with the quiet, thorough persistence of someone for whom caring about something means doing something about it, even when the something in question involves crawling through a crawl space at undignified hours with a lantern and a caulking knife. She looked at the dust on his nose for a long moment. "Stay for dinner," she said. The dinner was venison stew that Anya had not cooked, because Anya did not cook, a fact she disclosed without embarrassment. The stew had been sent up from the kitchens. It was good. This was beside the point. Marcus talked about the eastern supply routes. Anya listened, not the polite listening of someone being patient, but the engaged listening of someone who was following the logistical thread and had opinions about the third way station. She expressed those opinions. They argued for 40 minutes about optimal patrol coverage of the eastern boundary. It was the most comfortable Marcus had been in a room in recent memory. "You've been trying to find that gap for 3 weeks, Anya said. 18 days. "Why?" He looked at her. "Because it was bothering you." The sentence sat between them, more direct than he'd intended. He braced. Anya studied him. "The northern corridor has had a loose flagstone for 2 years, she said. "It drives me mad every time I walk past it." Marcus noted this. He noted it very carefully. "I could look at that," he said. "Yes," Anya said. "You could." The official record of the reign of Alpha King Barrett Locke would note trade accords and pack unifications and prosperity. It would say nothing about a felt mouse on a windowsill, or a wolf grooming a cat in the moonlight, or a young rogue who agreed to talk because a fat orange cat sat on his boot and purred so hard the ground shook. It would not mention a pack elder with charts, or 3 pups who made friends across a border dispute without thinking anything of it, or a king who learned, in his 2nd month of marriage, that a partner is not a liability. It's the thing that makes you capable of the right call at the right moment. Dinah kept the unofficial record. She had always intended to. She wrote it in the margins of the council minutes, in letters to her sister, in the growing file that Silvana maintained with characteristic precision and no editorial comment. "The reign of Barrett Locke," she wrote, "was defined by the unconditional surrender of a wolf to a cat." And everything that followed, from learning that surrender and strength were not, in the end, opposite things. Rex, for his part, had been working on the epic since October. He was on the 43rd stanza. It was, by all internal accounts, going very well. He had recently added a section about the small king's diplomatic triumph over the sword-bearing interloper, which he felt was his strongest work to date. Silvana had not read it. She was not going to read it. She had filed its existence under "Noted" and left it at that.